So I'm Steve. I'm an ontologist at Semantic Arts, and I'm going to talk today about date math in SPARQL. And this grew out of a recent project where I had to do some date math, and it was a struggle. So I had to figure out how you do it. All right, yeah. So really looking forward to telling you about what I learned. Okay. So here's the plan. We're going to go through first what you can do in SPARQL 1.1 with dates, and then what you can't do. There's some things you can do and some things that just won't work, and then we'll look at workarounds for the things you can't do, and then finally look at what might be coming in SPARQL 2.0 to address some of those limitations.
Can I make a quick clarification? As
Sure.
far as I know, it's SPARQL 1.2.
Yes, that is correct. The working group that is SPARQL 1.2.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. So here's the first thing that you can do with dateTimes in SPARQL, in SPARQL 1.1. So the SPARQL standard supports comparisons between dateTimes. You can say this date is less than that date, and the operators defined in the standard include these ones. So you got equals, not equals, less than, greater than, and everything, every combination of those. And those are defined because, or at least it makes sense that they sort of need these because you need those to do order by. And you can order the query results regardless of what type of thing that variable is bound to. So you got to have at least these things defined to do an order by. Okay, so we can do these comparisons. Next thing we can do is use any of these functions on a datetime. So I'll go through each of them. The now function returns the datetime at the time of query execution. So if you put a now function in your query and execute it, it'll grab the time that you executed the query and return that. And then there's a couple time zone extracting functions. If you've got a datetime, you can extract the time zone with this time zone function, and that'll come back as a datetime duration, or you can get the time zone as a string. Then you can also get the year. It'll be an integer. You can get the month. That'll be an integer. Same for day, hours, minutes, and seconds will be a decimal, because that can come back with fractions, with up to 3 decimal places for seconds. You can keep track of up to milliseconds. Okay, so so you can do all these things. Yes, I heard a question.
Yeah, feel free to tell me to look it up myself. So now it's fixed when.
I believe that's the way. Yep.
Okay, I'll talk about time zones in a bit.
Yeah, it definitely is the same throughout the query.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so that's what you can do. Here's some stuff you can't do. You can't add a duration to a date time. So I can't say, I know what time it is right now. Find me the time 1 month from now, at least not by just adding the duration 1 month to that date time. Also can't subtract one date time from another date time. I can't say, here's the date time of this JISC council, find me the date time of last JISC council, and then subtract one from the other to get the time between those 2 JISC councils. That will not work in SPARQL 1.1. And then also none of these other XSD data types will do much of anything in SPARQL 1.1. It's just supporting pretty minimal stuff with dateTimes, not with the date September 3rd, the time 9 a.m., the year month September 2020, or the year 2020, or any of these other things are not supported in SPARQL 1.1.
I'm assuming, Steve, that's derivative of the fact that OWL doesn't support any of those types. Is that correct? OWL, in fact, does not include anything but datetime in its spec.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm not totally clear on the relationship between the OWL standard and the SPARQL standard, but I think that's really interesting and worth exploring. Yeah, thank you. Okay. So if you need to do some math with dates, times, or date times that's not supported by the SPARQL 1.1 standard, your options are: you can either extract the parts of the date time you need to do the math in SPARQL to your desired precision. So you have those functions for year, month, day, and so on. So you can pull out the day and then do whatever math you need with that. So that's that first option. So you can pull out the parts and do math with those. Second option is to do the math with some code that either pre-processes or post-processes your data. The third option is to use a non-standard platform-specific implementation of SPARQL date math. So I'll go through each of these options. Okay. So let's do a couple of just straightforward examples. Suppose you want to book a patient appointment for the same time next year. So a simple query that, it'd be great if this just worked, is say select next time, where next time is now plus 1 year. But this will not work in standard SPARQL. This is trying to add a duration that's not supported in the SPARQL standard. So what can you do? Well, what you can do is you can extract the year of now and add 1 to it and plug it back in to that date time to get next year. And that will work every day except March 29th. So you'll have to add in some edge case condition to deal with that. But this will work most of the time. Okay, second example. Suppose you want to find a patient's age by subtracting their birth date from today's date. So we'd like to just say, take now minus the patient's birth date and get their age. But that will not work in standard SPARQL. That's trying to subtract one date time from another, which is not supported by the standard. So here's what you can do as a workaround. You can extract the bits of the date time that we need to do the math. So first bit is pull out the year of right now and the year of the birth date. And the approximate age is just current year minus birth year. And that'll get things exactly right for everybody whose birthday has already happened this year. But it's not quite right for people whose birthday hasn't happened this year. So this condition right here, this big messy thing, is basically saying if someone's birthday hasn't happened yet this year, then subtract 1 from their approximate age to get the right answer, otherwise subtract 0. So that's just dealing with that case. But this will basically get age right. And notice this only goes down to days, so if we wanted hours, minutes, seconds, precision, we could make this decrement condition extra complicated to get that precisely right. Okay, so this really will work. We can do this sort of workaround in SPARQL. And you can get as much precision as you need. We can go right down to the milliseconds in that age calculation. But if we want to do math precisely and handle all the edge cases, then we have to make our queries more complex to do that. And we saw a little bit of that so far, but it just gets messier if you want to do, number of days. You have to worry about different days in different months, or different numbers of days in different months, and it just gets ugly. So at some point, I think it becomes reasonable to either farm out the date math to some code outside of your SPARQL query, or to use a SPARQL engine that supports functionality beyond the 1.1 standard. So we'll talk about that next. Okay, so lots of different SPARQL engines have some sort of solution to this, but they have gotten implemented a little bit differently. So this chart is summary, and then we'll go through the details of what's happening in different SPARQL engines. So first, Blazegraph does support adding a duration to a date time. Doesn't yet support subtracting one date time from another. Had a back and forth with them about this, and they've said this is coming in version 7.1.0 of Blazegraph, the next big release. So there's some things you can do, some things you can't yet do in Allegro Graph. Blazegraph does support adding a duration to a datetime. If you subtract one datetime from another, you don't actually get a duration, the duration between them. You get an XSD double that's the number of days between those two datetimes. So slightly different there. Virtuoso gives you something a little different too. The duration to add to a datetime has to be an integer in seconds. So you can say this datetime plus 45 seconds gives me this other datetime. And you can also subtract one datetime from another, and it gives you the integer number of seconds between those two datetimes. So we get a little bit of variation there. Jena does this really straightforwardly. You take one datetime, add a duration, get another datetime, subtract one datetime from another, and you get a duration. So it works the same way in both ways. Stardog and Anzograph also do the same thing as far as I can tell. And MarkLogic, again, does the same kind of thing, but actually is even more general. MarkLogic is an XML store, so it's querying RDF data in the XML serialization using XPath functions. So the full XPath function set is supported in MarkLogic's SPARQL engine. And that means that those other data types I mentioned are actually also supported there in MarkLogic. Okay, so let's go into some details of specific implementations. And what I'm going to do is basically take this query around to a bunch of different SPARQL engines, and that'll illustrate differences in behavior. So first, can this SPARQL engine bind the now function to a variable? Can it subtract a duration? Can it subtract one datetime from another to get a duration? And then can you add back that duration to the datetime to get the original datetime you started with? Okay, so first, just sort of caution is it appears to me that the Protege SPARQL editor supports at most the SPARQL 1.0 standard, which does not include any of these datetime functions. So the SPARQL datetime functions in SPARQL 1.1 just do not appear to work in the Protege editor. So you got to try something else if you want to do datetime functions in SPARQL. Allegro Graph. Start there. So this is actually just a funny little bug that I found and reported, and they've fixed now. So notice when I try to subtract the duration, it doesn't work. But when I add -1 day, it does work. So this is just a funny bug that I reported to Allegro Graph, and they fixed that will be out in the next version.
Any way you can make the image bigger, it's just like, I can't read that print.
Okay, what I'll actually do is just pop over to Allegro Graph where I can zoom in easily.
Steve, what is the P1D? What does that signify?
So this is XSD duration syntax. This is saying 1 day.
Ah, okay.
-1 day.
And for those who may have trouble seeing, there is a zoom function on GoToMeeting that you can use to increase the screen.
Oh, I see that. Thank you.
Cool. So yeah, this is just a funny bug. It doesn't work when you try to subtract. It does work when you add -1 day. So they've fixed this now, but I mean, the next thing I want to point out is just, this is as far as we can get. You cannot do now minus yesterday, one datetime minus another. That will not work in Allegro Graph. Okay. Next up, Blazegraph. So I will again just pop over to Blazegraph to show you this zoomed in a little more. But notice we get almost everything bound except this one variable, and the type is XSD double, and that is actually why. So let me get into that. So when we run this query, we're able to subtract 1 day from now to get yesterday. We're also able to subtract now from yesterday to get the duration between them, which is 1 day. But since that 1 day is represented as a double, Blazegraph does not support adding back a double to a date time to get another date time. So since you add a duration, since a duration addition is what's supported and date time subtraction gives you a double, not a duration, you can't even go back the other way, which strikes me as sort of an odd feature of this implementation.
I kind of think it's correct. I mean, how does it know what 1.0 means? 1.0 days, minutes, seconds, years, centuries?
Exactly. So that's totally reasonable. So yeah, I agree that that makes sense to worry about adding 1 to September 2nd to get September 3rd. But like we could get the unified approach by just having 1 date time minus another date time gets you a duration. Then we'd have uniformity in both ways. Yes, we get a little variation here, getting a double back from date time subtraction.
Hey, Steve, before you leave that, how come there's no precision in now and yesterday? Is this a date as opposed to a date time, or?
So you see the hover over thing, raw ISO timestamp?
Okay,
This
thanks.
is just Wikidata trying to show you things pretty.
Okay, yep.
If you hover over day, is it actually just 1.0 and that's it?
Yep.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you try to cast that back to an XSD duration, does it consider it a day? Or does it just not even work?
You'd probably have to do another bind statement to essentially create a 1 day duration.
Right. We could do that. Like there's a workaround. It's just sort of, I don't know, to me, this is definitely ugly to have it like this.
Right, because the number that you get has no meaning, right? It doesn't tell you, like, we know because we know the 2 dates that it is a day, but if you had arbitrary dates, you'd have no idea what you're getting back.
Right.
It occurs to me that maybe the story is that Wikipedia just doesn't deal in durations of time less than a day because it's about historical data, and that's you really know.
It's the Blazegraph engine, right? It doesn't know about the data.
Oh, yeah, okay. So this is not an engine specific to Wikidata.
This just happens to be the one Wikidata uses. But yeah, Blazegraph is independent of Wikidata, and they just chose it as their backend for their query service.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So next, Virtuoso, which is the backend to DBPedia. So you'll see here that this bit, subtracting a duration from now, does not work at all. But that's because Virtuoso does things in a slightly different way. When you ask the query using, so for Virtuoso, you have to use the number of seconds to represent the duration, and then it will work. So let me pop over to Virtuoso and show you that. Okay.
So intuitive.
Yeah, so I'm going to show you a couple different versions of this query based on what I'm commenting out. Okay, so this query does pretty much everything we want it to. You say find now, subtract a day to get yesterday, do now minus yesterday to get the duration of a day, and then add yesterday plus day to get today, which matches now correctly. So similar to Blazegraph in that they've used numbers rather than durations to represent this stuff, but they at least did it consistently both ways, so you can add that integer back to the day to get a another date time. And then let me talk about the commented out stuff here. So I think this is basically why Virtuoso ended up with this implementation, is that before they supported minus and plus in these cases, they used a special function called dateAdd that works like this. You say dateAdd and then give it either seconds, minutes, hours, or whatever, and then tell it how many of those. So add this number of seconds to this date time. So this is their first implementation of duration addition, and basically this is just shorthand for this with seconds in there. And then here, so let me run that query. See, we get the exact same thing by switching the minus for the date add, and then it's the same deal on the date diff. The minus sign for date times is just date diff using seconds, and it works the same.
So Steve, did you try it if you replaced second with day and 86,000 with 1? Does that work?
Let's try it. Yep. Works.
Cool. So that's a Virtuoso function though, right?
Yes, I'm guessing BIF stands for built-in functions, and it's completely non-standard.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, there's even a couple other funky ones in the BIF namespace that I didn't bother digging deeper into, but there's like a BIF contains that'll tell you this date is in this date range. Yeah, so there's a couple extra things built into Virtuoso. Okay. So next up, we get Jena. Here I'm showing you an example from Semaphore, but this is also top quadrants SPARQL engine. So this works all the way across the board. We get now, we can subtract a day to get yesterday, find the difference between these two dates to get this duration, 1 day, and then add this duration back to yesterday to get today. Yeah, so that's sort of the end of my summary of platform-specific implementations. And then Anzograph, MarkLogic, Stardog all end up following this same pattern where they use XSD durations and support date time subtraction as well as duration addition. Okay, so next I'm going to jump into how I dealt with a recent use case. This is sort of what led to me thinking through all this stuff and trying to figure out how to do it. So in the recent case I was working on, the database used was Allegrograph, and the important temporal bits of information that needed to be calculated were the age of a patient, the length of a hospital visit, and we also needed to know when was a patient readmitted within 30 days of being discharged from the hospital. So the green thing is what we were able to do in Allegrograph, and the orange things were things we couldn't do in Allegrograph. So let me go into that in a little more detail. So readmission within 30 days is something that Allegrograph can totally handle because it just requires duration addition. So to figure out whether something happened within 30 days, you take your first date, add 30 days, and then see whether that is greater than your second date. So that's a straightforward way to find what happened within 30 days that Allegrograph can totally do. But Allegrograph cannot handle that date time subtraction yet. And that's what you need to do to say today's date minus that patient's birth date is their age. And their discharge date minus their admit date is the length of their hospital stay. And Allegrograph just can't do that. So I used a combination of those two other strategies I mentioned, either pre-processing with some code or using a non-standard SPARQL engine. I actually did both of those things. So as part of our ETL process at Semantic Arts, we very commonly use TARQL, which is SPARQL for tables. and that allows you to convert CSV data to RDF data. So it's basically you write a SPARQL query and take some CSV as input, and then you can do whatever you want to do with regular SPARQL, except it'll start by binding each column header as a variable to all the values in that column. And TARQL is built on the Jena ARQ SPARQL engine, which does support datetime subtraction. So what I actually did was use TARQL to do the datetime subtraction that I wanted to calculate the length of a hospital stay. So we had some CSV data that looked something like this, where you have an admit date and a discharge date, and then the SPARQL that runs against this to convert it into RDF looks something like this. Construct the triple that a visit has a duration with this duration, where the duration is the discharge date as a date time minus the admit date as a date time. And this totally works in TARQL, even though it won't work in a Blazegraph to give you these has duration triples like this. Okay. So that's, let's see. So yeah, that's how I dealt with this case. Was some of the stuff we could do in a Blazegraph, other stuff we couldn't do in a Blazegraph, so I ended up doing it in TARQL. Okay. So moving on to the next thing. Apparently this is SPARQL 1.2, and I misjudged this here. Let me just pull this up. This is fun to look at. So this is a GitHub issue on how should arithmetic operators for durations, dates, and times be formalized and specified in the SPARQL spec. So yeah, and you can see it here. It should be SPARQL 1.2. That's my typo in the presentation. So the proposal here is basically that we should just reuse the operators from XPath by extending the mapping of these operators to the XPath functions. So that's, let's see, hop back to the presentation. So yes, that's the basic suggestion, is to just use the XPath function set for SPARQL, and that would allow us to add and subtract an XSD duration from a date time, subtract one date time from another, and that will also support these other data types as well. And I think what the pattern I'm seeing here is that there's some convergence on this way of doing things, using XSD durations in both cases, and there's still a couple definite outliers. But it does seem like there's a chance, at least, that the platforms are working toward a consensus along something like this, which would align pretty nicely with that WC3 group recommendation.
So Steve, are the last four there syntactically identical to the recommendation?
So I think all of the last four are identical in some ways. They'll all allow you to do duration addition and date time subtraction in exactly the same way. I think that Mark Logic will currently support all of these other data types, but the other ones are unlikely to. So that would be a current difference. Okay. But at least on duration addition and date time subtraction, yes, these all four have converged, and in the sense that, let me find it. This query that I showed you works in Jena. This query will work exactly the same way in all four of those.
But in the Git issues from the W3C, they're going for the exact same syntax then?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And what is planned for the Blazegraph implementation? Do you know? Are they also going in that direction?
I believe it's going to be XSD duration. But when I double checked my exchange with them, I couldn't confirm that that's actually what they said.
Okay.
So yeah, I will have to follow up on that.
Hey, Steve,
Yes.
do these engines handle like overflows okay? Say like you're towards the end of the month and you add a week to it and it overflows to the next month. Does it handle that all right?
Yes, like that's not really, if I'm understanding the question, that's not really a problem for these ones. So here, let me scroll back to, so you know, when you're doing let's see. When you're doing this sort of workaround, you have to worry about that all the time. If I, you know, add 5 days to my date, is that, you know, do I just have to add 5 to the days, or am I going to run out of days that month and have to roll over to the months? To, you know, am I on the 26th and then adding 5 days will bump me up to the 1st of next month? So dealing with these workarounds, you have to worry about that all the time. But
Okay.
When you're just doing, you know, the straightforward query, saying, you know, now this minus this or this plus this, all of these implementations are dealing with, you know, switching months and all those complications. Shouldn't be a problem.
Okay. Thanks.
In financial work, there are all these strange things they use, like, you know, the 360-30, which assumes that a year is 12 months of 30 days each, you know, because back in the day, people didn't seem to be able to compute these things, you know, accurately, and they've gotten frozen into various standards.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a messy situation. I mean, let's hope nobody needs to do that now. I don't know.
For those who have their ear to the ground, you know, in a way that I don't, is there any talk about when the SPARQL 1.2 recommendation might come out?
So we are not really even close right now, right? It's a community working group which produces a recommendation document, which then goes to the formal W3C and it becomes a real proposal, and then it gets, you know, the whole thing, right? It was the camel as a horse designed by committee, right? I mean, there is a multi-stage process, and there is a lot of other things. Date was one of the first ones that they settled on because it was pretty well known what we wanted. It's like get to where Jena is, or really get to where MarkLogic is, because we want to be if we're XPath compliant and there's a well-defined standard, and that's a good goal, and we're halfway there, let's get all the way there. There are other issues relating to more computationally difficult portions of SPARQL that are being debated in a more lively manner, and I'm going to suspect that those will be the major delay in the adoption of 1.2.
Very diplomatic.
So we're talking a year? You're saying not even close. Could you imagine it being out and ready in a year, or is that even optimistic?
I think it's going to be. There are SPARQL users that are pushing for certain things. There are SPARQL vendors that are saying, let's make what we already have the standard. And I think that's going to be your major delay is, are they able to come to a thing where they say, okay, fine, we can get there fairly easily? Because nobody wants their competitors to get things for free.
That's what vendors always want to do. The answer to when it will be done is when it is golden brown on top and you can stick a toothpick in and it doesn't come out gooey.
Yeah,
So,
that's about right. Yeah.
I think some of the easier parts of 1.2, like date math, my guess is most of the vendors will start implementing it even before the standard's official.
They have already.
Yes,
Yep.
I mean, it is becoming the de facto standard, and if you can rely on it being there from your vendor, then whether or not it's completely standard becomes secondary. And I think that's where we're going.
The emerging standard, does it already support all the XPath functions, which is what 1.2 is suggesting, or are they just along that direction?
It depends on the engine. Like Steve said,
Yeah,
Mark
okay.
Logic is a XPath engine, so it supports
Mhm.
everything. The others, I do not know which part of it they'll get
Yeah.
to.
Okay. Okay.
So there's always a portability risk until it is in fact a standard.
Yeah.
Boris, have you tried this in Neptune? Did you look in Neptune? What are they doing?
I have. It's the Blazegraph engine, so
Sort of,
yeah.
Sort
Of course, it may have evolved a bit.
That doesn't necessarily mean it'll work.
Yeah. Neptune is like Blazegraph minus, so it's.
Yeah. Okay.
The nice thing about standards is there are so many.
Yes, of course.
That's
yeah.
true in general, but that's not really the problem here. That the bad thing is that of implementations there are so many and so divergent.
Yeah, exactly. Steve, I have just a tiny little question about time zone. Time zone is something about XSD time, daytime duration. I didn't understand how that's a time zone. Maybe that's just a mistake.
Is it just the offset from Greenwich?
Yeah, it's the offset from GMT as a duration.
Yeah.
Otherwise known as
Oh, in other words, so if Pacific time is -9 or something like that. Oh, I see. And hours, so it's an hour. Okay, I get it. That makes sense.
Yeah, we need to...
Probably minutes.
Essentially, it's a number of.
usually it's minutes because.
Okay,
of,
that makes sense. The time zone is an offset. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
So,
the default now is a GMT time.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
So here's
So
my
it-
time zone as a duration, and then as a string.
Yep.
Huh. I see. All right, that's cool. Thanks.
Yeah, the notation doesn't give you any way to write down the true time zone. It only lets you write down the offset.
Right.
So, Steve, I got a question. Hello, Steve.
Yes, go ahead.
The downside you are saying that SPARQL 3 also may not include a lot of this stuff.
Oh,
So-
that's not what I'm saying. That's a joke. The point is, we have no idea how long it's going to be, and even
Okay,
if we SPARQL 3.0,
And
it's still.
I see. I'm more bound to the literature because of my recent hard drive crash and all. So I saw some T-SPARQL, which is temporal SPARQL. Some new experiments are there. I don't know of SPARQL and how good they are. That's what I had a question.
So the question is, there's something called T-SPARQL, and you want to know,
Yes.
is this any good?
Yes, because when I was running some of the queries in Jena earlier in 2017, I had faced problem with the time and time zone and all those. And then I moved out of little bit, and then I'm not in touch with datetime, and so and I was surveying the literature and all, and it says T-SPARQL. Now I'm really amazed of what is this.
Yep. So yeah, I'd have to poke at this. Certainly,
The key is in the title, which is that it's. Can you scroll back to the title? A little more.
Yes, it's
Okay. T-SQL 2. That means it is about bitemporal times. In other words, there's a time when something happens and a time when it is as of. Or to look at another way, a time when it's effective and a time when it is recorded. And those are separate things, and that's how T-SQL 2 works. That's what it's about. So this is
but
evidently
then the use case.
do this all the time.
Yeah, the use case is mainly for IoT or.
I'm sorry, use case mainly for what?
for IoT?
No,
Internet of Things?
use cases mainly for banks that I know of, because a bank has to deal with changes that cause things to be retroactively effective. For example, if the bank bounces your check, then they charge you a fee.
Okay.
However, if it turns out that they bounced your check in error, they have to revoke that fee. So the fee is applicable, in time in transaction time, but not during that time in historical time, because it was an error in the first place, and they've undone it.
Okay, and also healthcare. Will it also help in healthcare?
There are some edge cases, and mostly with, compliance and liability. Should you have known that this was the right drug at the time?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thing.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Steve.
What did the president know, and when did he know it?
Right.
What we really need is a function that adds yesterday to now, because we didn't get all our work done.
Yeah, so I mean, this is sort of, not a happy ending talk that, we're not that close to converging on a standard, and I think this is a bad thing for SPARQL and RDF. We've seen how SQL has developed, more flavors than you can count, and that's why it costs millions of dollars to move a system from one database to another, because you got all these different flavors of the query language. And we're seeing a little bit of SPARQL moving in that same direction, with people building up these different flavors to handle, a case they need to handle that's not yet covered by the standard.
That's because the SQL standard is toothless. Basically, everything that's happened since, 1992 is optional.
Right.
Optional means we do it if we invent it, and otherwise we don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is not helping my perspective of creating an easier on-ramp into the semantics environment.
It shouldn't. One thing I would ask is if there's been any consideration in the community group to doing this in a more modular way, rather than waiting for a big numbered release and releasing modules, because SQL has done that with some success, and say, okay, so what you got here is SPARQL 1.1 plus this module and that module.
Well,
Yeah. Go ahead.
My take on it is that I don't know how much discussion has happened, but I've already been proposing to them that they start just looking at it as, instead of one big thing, the things that they can agree on quickly is 1.2, then you start working on 1.3 and 1.4. It will make things move faster. It's not necessarily modular, because I don't necessarily like the idea of modular.
The
you need
issue
to know
there,
whether something is supported or not.
that a minor version is what the rest of us would call a major version.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the granularity, there was 5 years between SPARQL 1.0 and 1.1. It's been 7 years since then, so some would say that they're overdue for an update. And I think that that's going to be a potential driver at some point of time. They're going to say we have enough to initiate the full W3C process. I'm not sure if they're at that point right now.
Well, that was excellent, Steve. Thank you. Should we just call it a wrap?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. That was great.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. That was
Thanks,
great.
Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
All right,
And
take care.
And Melissa, are you the person in charge of recording? Make sure we save this.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks all.